India is battling the coronavirus pandemic. The country continues in a lockdown, a 21-day lockdown in an effort to try and control the coronavirus pandemic. I have with me Jairam Ramesh. He's the chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Science, Technology, Environment and Climate Change. Also an engineer by training who trained at MIT and at other institutions in America. Jairam, what is your first response? How has the Indian science and technology system handled the coronavirus pandemic, and is it rising up to the occasion to meet the challenge?
Well, it's too soon to tell, but I'm sure that the government has mobilized both the medical community, the public health community, as well as the S&T community at large. This is going to be a long haul. We have been in a lockdown. Today is exactly the 14th day. And I don't think that looking back, Parliament was meeting till the 22nd of March, and it didn't appear that we were going to go into lockdown 24 hours later. If I were to go back in time, I don't think any of us in January quite comprehended the seriousness of the catastrophe that was going to overtake not only India, but the rest of the world. We thought this is going to be localized in Wuhan or in parts of China. And then when it hit Italy, we thought it will be localized in Italy, and then South Korea, and then Iran. But that it would become a global pandemic, in January or even in February, very few of us actually realized it. I mean, I was traveling till the 20th of February, and as I've given you the example of Parliament, which met till the
Sure.
22nd of March. So I think we were caught unawares, certainly, but I think the government has, whichever the government is, will have to have mobilized, as I said, on the one side, the public health community, which is to address the day-to-day concerns and worries and distresses, and in the long run, in the medium to long run, the science and technology community to mount the appropriate response in terms of development of vaccines and so on and so forth.
One of the things is that the salaries of the parliamentarians, the president, the vice president, the other government officials, essentially in the parliamentary system, has been cut. Essentially trying to garner resources. Do you think some of this should also be struck from, say, the non-essential needs of the science and technology sector? And let me highlight a very big program. See, there is an earmark 10,000 crores for the Gorgonyaan program. Do you think that should go ahead, or should that be shelved for the time being?
Well, Gaganyaan was underfunded even in the budget that was presented on the 1st of February,
Yes,
Pallava. In fact, this was pointed out by the Standing Committee.
yes.
And when we spoke to the ISRO chairman said, yes, it is underfunded now, but we expect to get additional resources in the revised estimates in November. But that doesn't seem to be on the cards right now, given the fact that they were underfunded by a huge amount,
Yes.
almost 8 to 9,000 crores. Yes, I think there has to be a ruthless review of all public expenditure at the present moment. I'm not in a position to say about Gaganyaan, but clearly the manner in which Gaganyaan was funded in the budget, in the expectation that there would be additional resources available in November, now is increasingly looking an untenable proposition. There are other projects. I mean, there is this 20,000 crore Central Vista redevelopment
Yes.
project, build a new parliament, build new government offices, build new, structures. I think all this has to be put off for another 3, 4 years till the economy gets back on rail. I mean, it's going to be a long haul. And I think there is a case for a ruthless review of all public expenditure and confining the expenditure to essentials. And what do I mean by essentials? I think in essentials expenditure will have two dimensions. Dimension one would be to extend direct cash transfers to workers in the unorganized sector, to migrant labor, to the poor people who have borne a disproportionate burden of the lockdown and the slowdown in economic activity. And the second would be the type of stimulus that would be required to kickstart economic growth, particularly in the MSME sector, which has been hit hugely by the lockdown.
Let me come back, focus sharply on Gaganyaan once more. See, it seems like a project which there is a certain deadline which has been put, and there is no particular need for that deadline to be met. In these circumstances, as the chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee, do you not think that it is time that Gaganyaan once again, it was shelved earlier long ago once when there was an economic downturn, should again be shelved maybe for 3 or 4 years, like you say?
Well, you see, I personally, Pallava, I've always believed that the original Sarabhai Dhawan vision of space somehow has given way to a new perspective on space. Space is an instrument of muscular nationalism. Space is an instrument of making Indians feel good. This was not the Sarabhai Dhawan vision. The Sarabhai Dhawan vision was space is an instrument of development, mostly. And in the last 4, 5 years, I think the ISRO has gone on a completely different track. It's made the nation feel good. It certainly enthused the younger generation and so on and so forth. But under the present circumstances, a Gaganyaan would be, would again make Indians feel good, undoubtedly. But as I said, even in February of 2020, when the budget was presented, the Gaganyaan budget was only about 30% of what
Yes.
was required. Only about 30% of what was required. And to me, to make up that balance 70% in November would be ill-advisable. So I would say that there is no great harm in putting off Gaganyaan by a few years. What's the point doing Gaganyaan when you can't deal with migrant labor, with the issues of migrant labor, when you can't reach distressed communities and distressed families? What's the point mounting this Gaganyaan, which, as I said, sort of is an instrument of muscular nationalism and
Certainly.
not necessarily of development of the type Sarabhai and Dhawan originally envisaged.
Certainly, I was on the road looking at the exodus, mass exodus of migrants, and I commented that we can send a satellite to Mars and Moon, but we can't provide decent basic transport for our migrant labor. What
Well,
kind of India is this?
it's very interesting. When I was in graduate school at MIT in 1977, one of the first papers we were asked to read was called "The Moon in the Ghetto Syndrome." And the Moon in the Ghetto Syndrome was this was a sociological analysis of why the US is not able to address the problems of the ghetto. And one of the points that was being made in this paper that we were asked to read is that just because Americans landed a man on the moon, they thought that they could use the same systems and the same approach to deal with problems of the ghetto. And that's how it's called in sociology. It's called the moon and the ghetto syndrome. And when I saw these images, on television and in the media in the last few days, that came back to me. And I think really, as I said, we need to focus our expenditures, public expenditures, on the basics, on the essentials. And this is going to be true for the next 1 year at least. And if it means a postponement of nationally prestigious projects like Gorgonyaan, I, for one, would not be very unhappy.
Do you think, see, for a long time, people have been asking for a very much increased expenditure on the health sector. Do you think the coronavirus pandemic is a wake up call and we should be doing that?
It's not just a question of public expenditure, Pallava. It's also a question of public systems of delivery. And I think, yes, I think health is a sector that has been neglected hugely. Remember that 80% of the state expenditure in health is by the state governments. And so as a national, as a nation, we are spending less than 2% of GDP on health. So clearly, public expenditure on health has to increase very significantly, but merely increasing public expenditure is not going to work. You have to reform radically the systems of public delivery. Delivery has to be public because access issues are very important. You cannot have purely private delivery. You cannot have purely private funding. There has to be public funding, public investment in health. And I think public systems of delivery are going to be the pivot, but it has to be a completely reformed and redone public systems of delivery. I was a member of the Standing Committee on Health for 5 years, and year after year, we made recommendations on how to reform public systems of delivery. And I'll give you one very simple example, very
Yeah.
trivial, very mundane example, which I have been singularly unable we have made this recommendation from the Standing Committee on Health. We set up All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi, and then we have set up All India Institute of Medical Sciences in different parts of the country. There are 13 of them. Now, why should the health minister be the chairman of each of these institutions of the governing body? Why can't we get a professional? Why can't we run these institutions on professional lines? And this is the simple, trivial, mundane recommendation which has not been accepted. So I think, public systems of delivery, public investment in health has to increase. Public systems of delivery have to be reformed. And most importantly, we have to understand there are also social determinants of health.
Yes.
Health has become now an instrument of inequality, like education. But education in the last 20, 25 years, access has expanded. I can't say the same thing on health. Health is where education used to be in the mid 1980s. And I think certainly the coronavirus pandemic should be a wake-up call for us that health is wealth.
Certainly. Let me ask you something which is important today. There is this talk of whether India should export hydroxychloroquine as demanded by America. And now President Trump has said there would be a retaliation on India if India doesn't export hydroxychloroquine. Let the merits be aside whether hydroxychloroquine useful or not useful. You being Commerce Minister yourself, at this stage, this arm twisting by America, should India succumb to this?
It's atrocious. So this type of arm twisting is really atrocious because, yes, it's true that we are the second largest producer in the world, but nevertheless, our first priority should be domestic demand. And it's only after domestic demand is satisfied should we even consider exporting it to countries who are badly in need. There's nothing wrong per se in exporting after domestic demand is satisfied. However, succumbing to the type of arm twisting that Mr. Trump has publicly engaged in, I think is simply unacceptable. And I hope that the government does not succumb to this. And the first overriding priority should be the availability of this drug for domestic patients, domestically. And if there is some, surplus available for export, so be it. But not under the circumstances laid down by Mr. Trump.
Uh, we are two-thirds into the 21-day lockdown. By now, are you hearing any concrete exit strategies of the lockdown?
I'm
And what should be the exit
hearing it.
strategy?
I'm not hearing anything that you're not hearing. I'm not reading anything that you're not reading. I've heard yesterday the Prime Minister said, apparently, I mean, this is unconfirmed, but apparently he talked about a calibrated exit in some parts of the country, and the lockdown continuing in the more badly affected areas of the country. I mean, I don't know anything authoritative. I wish, Pallava, that every day at 5 p.m. there was an authoritative briefing, on behalf of the government. During the Kargil crisis, I remember there used to be a briefing. There used to be the army man used to do the briefing. A senior army officer would do the briefing. A government of India official would be present, and every day we knew what was happening. I think there is so much of information, misinformation, and of course now the new animal is the social media. I wish really that from day one, that is from the 23rd of March, every day at 5 p.m. there would have been an official briefing, and the briefing would be done by, say, the Secretary of the Department of Health Research, Balram Bhargav, could have been done by the DG ICMR, could have been done by the Director of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. It should have been done by a professional. And I think that's absolutely essential. In the absence of that, we only go by news reports, we only go by what we hear and what we read. And as I said, your information is as good as mine. I am not privy to any inside information as of now.
Jairam, in the same briefing 2 days ago, the Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Health said that 274 districts of India now have the coronavirus, which
Right.
is which is almost a third or 37% of the country.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? Have we lost the
But I,
war on the coronavirus?
but I also read subsequently that 80% of the cases are, in less than 100 districts of the country. I mean, the various types of information keeps coming out. And that's why it's absolutely essential that there should be one focal point, one person giving out the information, and that person should be able to command professional respect. And there are no shortage of such people in the system. There's absolutely no shortage of people in the system.
So communication is failing. Again, science communication, health communication comes at the fore.
Absolutely, absolutely. You have to be able to communicate. You have to communicate. And the person who is communicating must command gravitas, must command respect. And as I said, India has a large number of such people, and it should be regular. You should be doing this regularly, and you should not have these multiple channels of information, which seems to be the case right now.
Uh, what a pleasure speaking to you, Jairam. You are always very sharp, very astute. Your key message, non-essential things should be curtailed, and one of them could possibly be Gorgonyaan. Also, the message that communication is key and it should happen with somebody who has the gravitas and should be a single point person for giving out
And
information.
it should be regular, Pallava. It should be regular. You should institutionalize it. 4 p.m. every day or 5 p.m. every day, whatever it is. And there should be an official briefing on a regular basis, and cover all bases that way.
What a pleasure speaking to you, Jairam. Always, always You are the thinker who thinks beyond what is happening today, and I hope it pans out and India can fight the coronavirus pandemic unitedly and win the war against.
I think this is an unprecedented situation. I think it's going to take us a long time to get back to normal. But you know, fear, panic, uncertainty is all there. It's all natural, and the damage is deep. But I think we must put our collective heads together. This is not just a scientific issue. It's not just a public health issue. It's also a social issue, and it's also a political issue. Um, the um, uh, the crisis has revealed, we can evacuate Indians from abroad, but we can't provide help to our own domestic migrants. There is a class dimension that has become very apparent, unfortunately, in the last few weeks. And I think we need to wake up. This is a wake up call in many respects. It's a wake up politically, it's a wake up economically, it's a wake up socially, and from a health perspective, it's certainly a wake up. And I hope, another thing I want to make a point, Pallava, before I close, there is a very close nexus between environment and health. And I think this is something that I have been repeatedly saying, that environment is now become a public health issue, whether it's air pollution, whether it's water pollution, whether it's deforestation, whether it's chemical contamination. We tend to look upon these as environmental issues, but these are no longer pure environmental issues. These are public health issues. And therefore, there is an intimate link between what we do insofar as environmental protection is concerned and its public health spin offs. And I think we no longer can afford this luxury of grow now, pay later. Nature will protect those nature protects those only who protect her. Prakriti rakshati rakshataha. This is what was taught to us
Yes,
thousands
yes,
of years ago. Prakriti rakshati rakshataha. Nature protects those who protect it. And I think that's one lesson also that we need to learn from this horrendous tragedy and catastrophe.
Thanks a lot for speaking to me, Jairam. Always a delight speaking to you.
Thank you.
And in these times, a namaste is what we should do. And we Indians have been doing this for a long time.
Salam alaikum.
Salam alaikum. Take care of yourself. Bye bye.
Bye.